Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views News and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today, we won't be having a very political sort of a conversation. Rather, this is going to be very informative. The reason is that there's this US journal that has lauded the economic reforms in Pakistan. And I'll share a couple of facts, though we do discuss about those issues which need to be resolved. For example, when we talk about exports or some other economic indicators which aren't that great. So we definitely want that reforms should be made so that we can see some positivity in those. But having said that, there are certain areas for some very unfortunate reasons we haven't been able to highlight. But in my today's program, I'll make sure that we should tell you that Pakistan has indeed progressed during the last 2 decades, at least, if you consider the last 20 years. I'll just give you a few examples. For example, in 1991, there was a survey that 4% of the entire population of Pakistan has a motorcycle. But when you talk about 2015-16, almost about 23, 24 years later, 34% of the population of Pakistan possess a motorcycle. So things have improved. That is the reason you'll see Yamaha investing 500 million. You'll see Honda motorcycle doing pretty well, or for that matter, this Honda Series 70, a very small motorcycle, which is a very practical solution to communicate on, to sort of commute on daily basis. That look at the number, the way it has multiplied. There was a time when the overall sale of Honda was around 2 lakh, but now it has exceeded over 20 million. So you can well imagine how many motorcycles are in use at the moment. You talk about use of washing machine for that matter. That has increased to 37% if we talk of 2016-17. You talk about very other basic products for that matter. Their consumption has also increased. We should always remember one thing. The population of Pakistan is around 200 million. This is what the estimates tell us. But it could be much more than that. So that is going to actually define the real number of people which are present. We do talk about the demographics of Pakistan, and we believe that 60% of the overall population is based on youth. So when you talk about youth, you talk about more consumption, you talk about more international food chains coming into Pakistan. But at the same time, another very important factor which we should also talk about is that the lower income group has also decreased. When you talk about the top 4%, that is there, but overall the middle class has increased, and that is a very, very healthy sign. When you look at the total number of the middle class, that is well around 40% if you look at it. Because unfortunately, when we talk about, or rather when we compare Pakistan with the regional powers like China or India for that matter, obviously that particular number isn't that great, because when you talk about 40% of the Indian population is their middle income group or the middle class group, you're talking about something like 50 crores. And when you talk about China, that is again, we will see a bigger number than India for that matter. But having said that, when you talk about Pakistan, when you talk about the middle income group, that number isn't that small. That number is equivalent to the entire population of Germany or the entire population of Turkey for that matter. So you can't rule out that fact that Pakistan is a small country or it isn't a market. Yes, because of China and because of India, we aren't talked much about this particular figure. But having said that, that's a great positive sign. And I'll just give you 2 examples. Similarly, I still remember when Shaukat Aziz was the Prime Minister, he once was addressing and he said there was a time when people would use washing soaps to take part in the villages. But now a certain brand, look at the sale, it has exceeded. Just look at the annual sales of Nestle in Pakistan. They're producing water, they're making milk and another couple of dairy products and chocolates for that matter. Their annual sale is around $1 billion in Pakistan. So that is a huge number you're looking at. Similarly, that is the reason that so many companies, they want to come and invest in Pakistan. Though at the same time, when you look at the major factor which was about terrorism or which was about the law and order situation, if you look at the last 2 years, significant improvement is witnessed all across the board, thanks to Operation Zarbayaz. Let me introduce you to our panelists who will be talking about the importance of this middle income group or the middle class for that matter. We have with us in our studio, on my right is Dr. Waqar Ahmed Saab. Dr. Waqar is the Deputy Executive Director of SDPI. Dr. Saab, thank you very much. And we also have with us in our studio Banday Saab, who is the Director of Prime Institute. Sir, thank you very much. Dr. Waqar, so are we on the right track?
Thank you, Faisal Saab. I think, as you rightly said in your introductory remarks, there are a couple of mega trends that Pakistan is now starting to experience, And the Wall Street Journal article that you picked up essentially highlights only one of those mega trends, which is the rise of middle class, Now, if one goes deep into the analysis that what has been the drivers of this rise of middle class, this is happening at the back of 3 or 4 trends which we need to take account of. First is the access to education. The very fact that you have greater number of people who have access to higher education, tertiary education, technical education is enabling them. And certainly education is one component of empowerment.
That's correct.
And this is how these people are coming out, presenting themselves, connecting with the outside world, They're also able to offer their entrepreneurial skills now, which is so much more important. So while, yes, the wage employment is something that we need to improve upon, it is the self-employment side which has actually grown, So if you look at the numbers...
And obviously that generates jobs.
Absolutely. So if you look at the numbers which Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan puts up every month, you have seen a month-on-month increase in new firm registration, which is a welcome sign. You have new startups coming and you have new social enterprises coming, which is again a healthy sign. So that's one. Second is the factor of youth. The very fact that for so many years we have had this debate whether this is demographic dividend or demographic disaster for us, and finally it is now turning to a point where yes, we are seeing this youth coming into the mainstream, contributing very constructively, and I think something which is playing a very important part in this is IT, the information technology. The youth of 2 decades back wasn't as connected as the youth of today.
Absolutely.
Which certainly, again, is the second type of empowerment with your youth and communities.
And look at the level of awareness they have. I mean,
Yes.
that is another very important factor. You raised a very important point, that was about entrepreneurship. In Pakistan, sir, Banday sahab, whenever we talk about youth, the general idea of most, if you talk to, let's say, 10 youngsters, they'll say, well, I'll do my BA or I'll do my master's and then I'll do my job either in a bank or in any private institute for that matter, or there would be some who would prefer to work for the public sector. Obviously, no matter how great you do, at the end of the day, sir, the public sector or the private sector cannot provide jobs to every single individual. And when you especially look at the demographics of Pakistan, I mean, that is a perfect case study, I would say. So how important is this small and medium businesses, sir? Small loans for youngsters who graduate and want to start a job. I mean, if you remember, the Prime Minister launched 6 schemes when they were targeting the youth in particular, other than the laptop scheme. That, how to sort of build in those skills, how to guide them, how to educate them to do your own business. Because at the end of the day, if you're looking at a job or a salary, let's say, which is giving you 30,000 rupees, I'm sure there are so many businesses in which with a very, I would say, small amount, you can actually generate that kind of money, sir.
The article you were quoting, they have started with the example of a tailor.
Of a tailor, exactly.
Exactly, and that is an example of an entrepreneurship. I mean to say that tailor
he was having 4 of the guys who were working for him.
Actually, and this gentleman has grown his business over a period of 15 years.
Yes.
Okay, so for that entrepreneur development, what is important is the risk-taking ability of a person. And for that risk-taking ability, the macro environment plays a very important role. It includes stability in the system, okay, your access to finance. There are many variables for that. But the question which comes, like Waqar have just mentioned about certain points, I want to point one trend which is very important for us to understand.
And that is, Dr. Sam?
That is the rising urbanization in Pakistan. If you look in the census of 1998, the last census which took place, we have a population of 137 million inhabitants. Out of that, the urban population was 32%. It comes around 44 million people.
That's
now,
correct.
in 2016, is estimated about 200 million. And one estimate, the urban population is now 40 million.
800 million.
Sorry, 40%. It means that that's 80 million.
Yeah.
Now it means it is
80 million.
almost double now.
Correct.
Okay. Now the population of Pakistan has risen at about 1.4 times, but urban population has
Almost multiplied.
almost doubled.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this double of population, look, urbanization is the key of prosperity in modern economy. At the same period, when China was there its urban to rural percentage was lower than Pakistan. It was at 28-26%. As of today, in the same period,
Is it also around 40%?
no, it is 56% now.
56% of the population
Yes,
practically of China
that
is living in the
key of that
industrial
prosperity.
zones
Yes.
primarily.
You know,
on the east coast in
on
general.
the east coast or in the central China, it is basically concentration of skill sets, concentration of your resources, which create that scale to make money out of that business. Now, Pakistan is going towards that end. As of today, when we are talking, we have 11 cities in this country which has a population of 1 million and above.
Correct.
Okay. The largest city is Karachi with over 20 million inhabitants, then Lahore around 10 million, and rest then Faisalabad 4 million and 1 million. The last one is Sargodha. Now 5 cities are in Punjab, okay, 2 in Sindh, 1 in KPK and in Balochistan. Okay, now this is the distribution we have. Now what is important for us in order to, for example, this middle class which you are talking about, bulk of this middle class resides in city. Now government has to has that focus on urban development,
Correct.
on making cities more livable. You make cities more livable.
Then we should give credit to this particular government, sir, because the way they are developing the cities, providing the transport facilities for that matter. Though people say that, you know, just by having bridges or a proper road system or a railway system is not the only indicator, but I guess they're very important components.
I think so. The most important thing which they are doing is doing intercity connectivity.
Yes, roads.
These roads, bridges, these ports, these airports, everything is important. This infrastructure has to be built by the government or with the private sector corporation. So what is important?
Ideally speaking,
Yeah,
yes.
what is important for us that if we want to sustain this prosperity which you are talking about, and we want to beat around the world also, then we have to focus on our cities. Unfortunately, on livability index,
They're pretty low, yeah.
Pakistani cities are not very high.
I mean, even the biggest city is Karachi, and you know there are so many problems. The moment it rains, there are issues. Then you know you have multiple other problems as well. But now another important point, sir. When you talk about educating the youth, that's great, but you can't have 100% people doing PhDs or everyone doing a master's degree for that matter, or for that matter, you can't have all 100% people who are MBBS doctors. This is nature, I would say. You'll have a certain number who will be into the medical side, and also depends on, like, for example, there was a time when everybody wanted to do MBA, and suddenly an MBA, that job became a clerical job for an MBA. Then media came in, everybody started doing their mass comm or international relations for that matter. The trends were there. Earlier you had, in 80s, you had like a couple of options, for example, medicine, or you had an option to do engineering for that matter. And then if somebody wants to go abroad and study, that was a separate chapter. But now there are many universities. You have this internet system, so you can actually sit in Pakistan and do a course abroad. Then there are so many other, I would say, seminars and workshops taking place from where you can actually learn. Various universities are providing evening programs to facilitate the executives. But sir, when we talk about technical skills, like somebody wants to become a good plumber or a good mechanic, car mechanic, or for that matter, a good welder or a mason or anybody for that matter, we do not have technical institutions. Technically, that person would be working with Ustadji, and Ustadji, this guy is going to be a chota, and chota one day would turn into an Ustadji. But that would take him at least 20 years. Don't you think that is an area where you really need to work?
I think this is a very important point because you have to plan for 100 years, you know. Only then you will have the manpower by the time
You're
you
looking
reach
at the
there.
current trends and the future trends.
And I think the starting point for this is usually an exercise which we call youth mapping, you know. And many countries have gone a step further and they haven't left it to the planning commission or the planning department to do this kind of youth mapping and design interventions. They have a Ministry of Youth Affairs, which at one point we also used to have.
So we had Bhutto Sahab was
Yes.
I remember
Yes.
he was from Ladkana, was the youth
Yes.
minister, and then we had a population minister.
Exactly.
Firdaus Ashik Awan Sahiba was the minister for that also.
So
So imagine,
now-
we had so many ministries, but we couldn't do much.
But now you see this responsibility falls on the provincial governments because they have the youth departments, they have the mandate now. The starting point to what you have just said is to set up what we call LMIS, Labour Market Information System.
Correct?
And while two of the provinces have announced a youth policy and they have established LMIS, there are other two provinces who have yet to do that. And then you have the federal government, which has to play the planning and coordination role for this kind of an exercise, which is demand and supply, coordinating demand and supply of labor, And while, of course, this responsibility has to be done in a very coordinated manner, but may I suggest at this point that we are lacking a framework, So if two of the provinces have actually made a youth policy, there may be duplication of programs.
Can't we have a uniform youth policy for the entire Pakistan? Or do you think, considering the literacy levels or the demographics or the psychographics for that matter, which would definitely differ from somebody who's living in Sindh as compared to Punjab or somebody living in Balochistan, if you compare with KPK?
Yes. So I was just about to say that under the 18th Amendment, you can't have an umbrella sort of a youth policy for everyone because provinces are empowered now. But in some cases, for example, and this was going to be my next point, that in some cases, as you mentioned, the training of skills, like you have NAVTEC. Now, NAVTEC is a national institution which develops a minimum set of standards for labor all over Pakistan, Now, it is, of course, it requires strengthening, of course. It has, for several years, it's been working in public sector setup, of course. There was lack of civil service reform. But this government has now introduced or sort of brought on board private sector members into NAVTEC as well as TAVTEC, the provincial.
Is that an effective idea, sir? Is it working well?
I think it is an effective idea
because unfortunately, we need to also learn something.
Yes.
The public sector mindset, when somebody comes in from the private sector, there's a clash of the way you do your daily assignments. I've witnessed that, in many cases, the public sector mindset hasn't accepted the mindset of the private sector. That is where the problem is. That is where the element of efficiency comes in. And unfortunately, I'll be very straight, and you'll totally agree, both of you gentlemen, that the public sector productivity is far below the desired levels.
I'll just add one point to that while agreeing to your point, that it is precisely due to this reason why Prime Minister had set up the Civil Service Reform Committee, because he wanted the committee to study other systems where parallel civil service, technocracy was brought into the civil service. You have mobile civil service like in the US and several other countries. Correct. Where technical people come in and go out, there's mobility. And as you are rightly saying, there is acceptance by the public sector to give that sort of empowerment to the private sector because they are there for a fixed tenure on fixed deliverables, which they are supposed to deliver. In case of skills program, it makes sense to have private sector on board because ultimately they are the demanders of labor.
Too much job, Barisab, let me put this question to you. In the private sector, sir, if you're a banker, you're in the marketing side, you are supposed to get me a certain number of accounts and a certain digit in the bank account, or your job is going to be at stake, sir. In the public sector's mindset, sir, only God can fire you, sir. Nobody can. The point is, which I'm going to make here is, when you look at the job security, we do understand that job security is really important. But having said that, if you look at the organizational development grid, I think countries should work on the same lines as well. You have got this concern for employees, and then there is another graph concern for production. And ideally speaking, it should be somewhere on a 45-degree angle. Too much concern for the employees, it becomes the public sector mindset. Too much concern for the production is the private sector mindset. Don't you think, sir, we should learn from that OD grid concept? But before I put this question to you, sir, we have been just joined in by Miftah Ismael Saab. Miftah Saab, Assalamu Alaikum. Hello? Miftah Saab, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Now, sir, since we are talking about this very interesting and important, I would say, report that was published, which said that the Pakistani economy has done really well in the last 20 years or so. Things have really improved. You talk about the middle income group or the middle class for that matter, that has really soared. Things are really, really fine at the moment, despite having few odds. But since we do not talk much about that, sir, I think it is high time to sort of tell the world that Pakistan is a successful story, sir. Your take.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about this. The foreign publications, whether it's Wall Street Journal now, or Forbes, or Economist magazine before that, or many Western banks, institutions have actually always, for the last year or so, praised the economic performance in Pakistan. I think that Pakistani journalists, economic journalists, sometimes lag behind, and they are not catching up to the wonderful things that are happening in Pakistan. But I think a lot of foreign actually are on to the great successes that our government has had in the last 3 years in managing the economy. The World Bank recently published a report which said that in the last 15 years, we've halved the number of people in poverty as a proportion. Gone down from 60 to 29%. That is a 15-year performance of reduction in poverty. But the Wall Street Journal article has actually basically also talked about what the wonderful things that have happened in the last 3-4 years, including cutting down incidents of terror in the last 3 years, including great growth in consumer spending in the last 3 years, a lot of motorcycles. We talked about foreign investments coming into Pakistan, like Renault, the French car maker, is now coming into Pakistan. Today, Morinaga announced that it's setting up an infant formula plant in Pakistan. So all of that obviously means that the middle class is growing. And with the middle class growing, there's a growing demand of consumer goods, consumer durables, fast-moving consumer goods. And that's why you see companies from around the world, from Europe, from America, from Japan, and China, of course, coming in and investing in Pakistan in various different fields.
Now, Miftah sir, one more point, sir. Since it is very important to look at least 20 years down the line and see where we need to go. What sort of an economic design do we have, sir? We are an agro-based country. Will we remain an agro-based country, or at some stage you see, let's say 20 years from now, let's say you talk about 2035. You see Pakistan as a country producing a lot of products and becoming some production-oriented in terms of its growth, or we haven't seen any value addition in various products over a period of time. It seems that we are missing on so many fronts. I mean, engaging youth in technical expertise, labor which is working abroad shouldn't be just a simple labor, sir. He should be technically correct in whatever he or she is doing. And especially looking after the youth bulk, sir. That could be a demographic disaster at some stage if we do not start working from today, as I would say, sir.
I actually think that the youth bulk that you're talking about is far from being a demographic disaster. It's actually going to be a demographic surplus, and is a demographic surplus. So I'm not at all pessimistic about the changes happening in Pakistan's economy. I think that agriculture as a proportion of GDP will probably go down, only not in absolute terms, but only because manufacturing will grow faster than agriculture, and services will also grow faster than agriculture. I also think that fewer people, when you say I talk about 2035, fewer people will be engaged in agriculture. Right now, half of our workforce is almost engaged in agriculture and producing only 20% of our GDP. But hopefully in 10, 15, 20 years, about half of those people will then go in manufacturing. Just the half people that are working today will be enough, as we increase agricultural productivity, as we do farm mechanization, enough to produce the same amount of grain, if not more. What we need, as you rightly pointed out, is technological revolution. We need to increase productivity of our farm workers. We need to increase productivity of our manufacturing workers. And we have to compete in this global environment now where other countries are also...
Your labor needs to be effective, needs to be efficient, needs to be productive. I mean, it has to have those skills to compete with the Chinese labor, for that matter, or the Bangladeshi, or the regional, for that matter. Miftah Sahab, one of our panelists, Banday Saab, who is the director of Prime Institute, he has a question for you. Zia Saab?
Sure. Miftah Saab, Assalamu alaikum. I want to ask this, that in last 2 decades, Pakistan's urban population is almost doubled, from 44 million to over 80 million now. Now, bulk of this prosperity can be linked with this urbanization. Now, this government of yours have any particular vision on optimizing the competitiveness and the livability of this urban economy?
I mean, I think one of the problems that people have talked about in the last 15 years of Pakistan, and Wall Street Journal article sort of talks about this also, is that we've not really governed our country as well as we can. And so this growing middle class, and especially the urban middle class, is providing a lot of its services by itself. This is why the emphasis now, especially after the 18th Amendment, is for provinces to actually provide these basic governance to their citizens, including schooling, health, roads, garbage cleanup, and all that. I'm happy to note that at least one province, I'm not going to name it, but at least one province has made some strides in the last 8-9 years. But I'd like to see that more and more of this thing will happen. And it's now a provincial responsibility that the provinces actually take up that issue. The growing urbanization in Pakistan, that you have to provide basic necessities and urban amenities to these residents. And you're absolutely right, the population of urban areas are growing a little faster than rural areas, and so the work has to be done here in the urban areas.
All right. Dr. Waqar sir from SDPI, he has another question. Please go ahead, sir.
Dr. Saab, Assalamu alaikum. I recall last year your institution was working on rationalization of taxes so that private sector can be given increased breathing space, and you were working really hard on bringing down the number of taxes and levies and surcharges which SMEs in this country are facing. Can we expect some progress on this in forthcoming budget?
Well, Dr. Saab, let me first admit that so far I have not been able to really successfully either convince the provinces or even the federal agencies to amalgamate taxes or to reduce the number of taxes. Of course, most of the taxes are in the provinces. But the finance minister is very keen on improving the business environment, and I think so am I, and so is the business community in Pakistan. And I hope that in this budget you will be able to see some sort of, especially in the provinces, some sort of a rationalization, especially with regard to the special economic zones that we've made. We're trying to talk to the provinces to not tax industry set up within this. And with the China-Pakistan economic corridor, we are also setting up some special economic zones. And there, I think we must provide better economic conditions and better business environment to Chinese businesses and other businesses to attract them to Pakistan. It's all good to build these special economic zones. It's all good to build this infrastructure. But unless I am more competitive than Bangladesh, unless I am more competitive than Vietnam, how do I persuade a Chinese investor to come and invest in Pakistan? If I have a multitude of taxes, as you noted in your question, in provinces, and if I have a multitude of taxes in the federal government, it is very difficult for me to bring investors out of China or anywhere else, and for that matter, and come and invest in Pakistan, because they have the whole world to invest in. So I think that the Prime Minister has done his job in terms of bringing infrastructure, but I think it's now for the rest of us in the provinces to work together and try and bring down these the number of multiplicity of taxes and try to rationalize the business environment.
All right. Thank you very much, Miftah Saab. Thank you very much for talking to us. Now, Bari Saab, the question was for you regarding the efficiency and improvements.
Yeah, we were talking about that. And as Waqar has added that we need to have that technical, input coming, technocrats coming into the bureaucracy. Look, Faisal, civil servants have a very important role in any economy. And this is not one fit for all strategy for every country also. Like in China, civil servants have played a very important role. In Singapore, you will see them playing an important role. In India, they have played an important role. Likewise in Vietnam, or even all these developing economies. So we cannot ignore the public sector servants' role in the growth of an economy. The point is this, that yes, we have some political issues in our country. There was a political instability. Even civil servants were not sure of their tenure. You were talking about that they have a life employment, but we have seen in these countries how civil servants were thrown out from their jobs also. Their jobs was not very secure in front of their political master.
But that's a separate issue.
Okay. The point which I'm trying to make is this, that important point is this, that Pakistan is a resource deficient country. Okay.
How would you say that, sir?
Resource deficient means that our revenue the availability of revenue for doing the infrastructure development by the government is not sufficient. As of today, when we are talking
But
about...
sir, if it is not sufficient, how come we end up not spending that money? I'm talking about the development budget. Don't you think it should be, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's the capacity, we do not have the capacity to consume that kind of money, sir.
No, I mean to say that what is important, I'm not having a number right now over here. What is important is something is good for the news headings also, that what is the materiality of that money which is not spent against the whole revenue, against the whole budget. That is important. I mean to say the unspent money is there in other countries also. But we are not, the question is this, that as of today, you're talking about CPAC. Why you're talking about CPAC? Because that money which is coming is being spent on our infrastructure. Our infrastructure is improved. Now, as suppose this money has to be spent by the Pakistani government. But Pakistani government didn't have that sort of a money. Now, the important point is that China is one resource. Now, our civil servants or our political master now has to be creative enough that what are the other sources for developing this infrastructure. China is coming because of its own interest, political or economic interest, they're coming. But this is our country. We as a Pakistani, our responsibility is more than any other of our so-called friends. Okay, so what is important for us? We have to understand how those countries which were resource deficient, they were raising finances. Now, they were raising finances from the capital markets. You call so-called your stock market, which has turned 46%. Why don't we have municipal bonds over here? Infrastructure bonds on this market? They has to be listed. This has been done in India, in China.
Infrastructure bonds.
Infrastructure bonds. Now, you raise money on that.
We do talk about bonds, like Pakistan bond, for example, and a couple of other bonds which were floated abroad. Got a very good response in certain cases.
No, that money has not been raised for the purpose of infrastructure building. It's more on the budgetary support for the government.
Correct. Okay. Primarily, yes.
For that purpose. What is important for us? There are so many models available over here. We have private finance initiative. Why don't these PPP projects, private public partnership projects, they don't get up over here in this country? We have got PPP cells in all these provinces. But what they have done, what is there on their plate? China are doing more than these PPP things have been doing. We have got so big, large companies. You're talking about a growing economy. Why don't 400 large Pakistani companies come and they finance the infrastructure of Peshawar or Karachi or Faisalabad or Gujranwala? This is the
way they have done in Japan, for that matter.
They are doing in the US. They are doing in India. We can talk for hours on this topic.
Like Tata, like Ambani's for that matter. I mean, they're huge investors in the infrastructure.
Yes, why not our Manshas, our Sehgals and all these people, they need to have that model so that our prosperity is sustainable and growing. This country has a lot of potential, my dear. So it means that we need those models, and these models has to be worked out by our civil servants also. We cannot ignore them.
So eventually it all comes down to the Planning Commission of Pakistan. Correct, sir?
This is very important what Zia Saab has just said, and I'll just take lead from him. I think what we have just realized, and you may have heard day before yesterday, that one of the things that this government has done is to announce the Infrastructure Finance Policy 2017. And that actually came as a news and went away as a news, and people didn't really realize what had happened during the ECC meeting, And that policy was very important for the local investors, which Zia Saab has actually mentioned, because local investors were feeling as if everything for China and nothing for us. And they were asking for a level playing field, So it was to build their stake in infrastructure financing, one. Number two, even where you have built the hardware, the infrastructure, the governance of that infrastructure, the software side,
very important,
is missing. Yep. And if civil service is the only instrument of development yet in this country, and if civil service has to govern that infrastructure from GENCOs to DISCOs to all the other PSCs, for example.
Can't do planning. I mean, they have just like a legislator is supposed to do legislation. Yes. But they are involved more into, having the electric poles or the gas pipes or.
Then I guess
that's how they get their votes. I mean, this is the job of the other form of governance.
This is reality.
The local bodies.
So I guess the starting point for Planning Commission, instead of just approving project and disbursing payments, has to be to also focus on the software side, which is the governance of infrastructure, and civil service reform. People who have to govern that infrastructure has to be the primary reform.
And you think they should be there? But they aren't.
Absolutely. There are three different forms of civil service in the country. You have federally recruited civil servant, you have province recruited civil servants, even sub-province there's recruitment, you know.
No, Banday Saab, when we talk about the growth, the economic growth, Vietnam is a brilliant example. But at the same time, if you look at the entire region, whether you talk about Philippines, you talk about Bangkok, forget Singapore is a different ballgame altogether, or you talk about Korea, or you talk about Laos, or you talk about Cambodia, that particular region. Malaysia is another example. Indonesia, you can't rule out that factor. We have seen a certain kind of growth during a certain era, and that was late 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000. Unfortunately, sir, because of the tension between Pakistan and India, or instability in Afghanistan for that matter, sanctions or in Iran also had an impact on Pakistan, if you look at that way. This region couldn't grow. Despite having so much resources, look at Iran, look at Afghanistan for that matter, look at the geographic location of Pakistan, and again talking about India. And SARC was a useless body, though it has been there for the last 40 years, but it's useless. Don't you think, sir? There is economic growth in the region now. Bangladesh is growing, so is India, so is Iran, I'm sure. Pakistan, as we were earlier talking about. Do they have a similar pattern in terms of growth, sir? Or we're not following the same pattern as such? Because there is a lot of similarity between these countries, sir.
You have talked about the Far East countries, and you have talked about the South Asian countries.
Sir.
And you are trying to figure out that what is the difference. Now, why that Southeast Asia grew so fast?
What is the difference between the two? And then when you talk about the region, what are the common factors?
Okay, the important point is this, that's a difference in politics in both the regions. The southeastern countries which you are talking about were under the security umbrella of the Western world on the US side. And they have embraced the capitalist model of market economy wholeheartedly. Second, third, they have strong dictators.
But don't you think, say, huge multinational corporations of Japan, for that matter, really invested in Vietnam, in Korea, in Malaysia? You pick up any product now, you'll hardly find any product with that brand made in Japan. It would be made in Korea, made in Indonesia, made in Malaysia.
Look, every country has its phase. When you're talking about Japan, after Second World War, when the whole country was devastated, Japan was not making cars at that time. They started very simple. And I have read a book of Akio Morita, the chairman of Sony Corporation. They started making these rice bowls. Those bowls they started making, the Sony thing you're talking about. And gradually they went into high-tech side. Now, if you're talking about Japan, Japan still today is the third largest economy.
No doubt.
Even if it is growing at a 0%, it means that it is sufficiently maintaining the GDP.
That's
the
correct.
equivalent GDP it is producing with a negative population growth. It means that it is sustaining.
And instead of having inflation, deflation.
Yes, it is sustaining its prosperity. Now, it means that all these countries are at different level of economic growth. We cannot compare one country to another country. Coming back to the South Asian model, what we have seen Pakistan at one time was growing at a very high rate in 60s, if you remember.
Yes,
okay,
early
at the
60s.
lows, early 60s. Now, what happened, what I believe also, that it was the wrong politics which we adopted. It's a wrong politics where we went all on this jihad incorporation, which affected our country, which is realized today, as you see by the banning of this Jamaatul Dawa, and the army taking the ownership of that. Now, we have a realization that this sort of a politics is not good for the economy. If it is not good today, it was not good yesterday also. Now, for that yesterday, we have paid an economic price. And it is important for us to
Even post
sustain.
9/11, we have paid an economic price.
Yes,
Almost 40% of our total GDP, that's what we have lost.
yes. That is because
And
of
when you look at Japan, sir, I was surprised to know that during this earthquake and tsunami incident, very few people died because of the earthquake. Majority died because of the tsunami. The overall, estimate of losses at that time was around $380 billion. $380 billion. And it was absorbed
1.5 times
like
of our
this. They
economy.
did not even sell a single bond in USA, sir.
So it means that they have
Look at the
those
capacity.
reserves.
Yes,
they have
sir.
those reserves where they can manage
And
their
they're
economy.
multinational corporations, they pulled in.
Yes, they can. And you can understand the productivity of Japanese. I mean to say that what reflects where they stand on the competitive index, on the other
Highest in the
dwindlers.
world, I would say.
Yes. So that is important for us to understand that every country has its own trajectory. But what is important, that Japan never went for the war. They never have these, even you can call these defense forces. Even in Pakistan Navy, when I was serving there, we have the survey ship from Japan, which they have given to MSA, which is Maritime Security Agency in Pakistan. So even for that survey ship, it was made in Japan, it was state of an art ship,
I'm sure.
but it was not being given to Pakistan Navy, okay, because Japan cannot sell it to the defense forces. So it was sold to Maritime Security Agency as a survey ship. So that's what you have to understand. The Japanese politics was very focused. They don't want to have any war. They have paid a very heavy price
I think
in
the
Second
only
World War.
I think either Japan has paid the price or Pakistan has paid the price in this war. They were very unfortunate because what happened in
I
Second
need to
World
say
War
Europe-
and post this war
Faisal,
on terror
50
philosophy.
million people lost their life in Second World War.
Imagine.
It was a very lethal war, and the biggest casualties were done in Russia.
Russia and
Yes,
Germany. Look what
Germany.
yes.
Okay, and you look at the economies, how they revamped those.
Now the interesting part is, sir, what happened to England? What happened to, as Mr. Bush says, excess of evil? So primarily the excess of evil during the Second World War was Italy, Germany and Japan. Japan, we all know what happened. I mean, if there were 2 nuclear bombs, the rest of the country was totally carpeted by
Yes,
bombs.
yes.
You talk about Germany, on one side it was USA and the Allied forces, and on the other side was Russia. Wall of Berlin, Germany into 2 pieces. And we all know what happened to Mussolini and his girlfriend in Italy. But look at the economy of Germany. Look at the kind of products and the nature of products and the quality of products they're making, sir. Look at Japan and look at Italy. Now, my point is, sir, what did they learn? Do you really have to go through a war to become Germany, Japan, or Italy for that matter, sir?
You want to lose that much people?
But, you know,
Waqar can.
I just wanted to go back to one of the points which Faisal Saab had made about SARC being a useless body, you know, which I don't think that it is. I think we really need to go back to the basics because peace in the region is important.
That is exactly what my point is.
And Pakistan must try to host the SARC conference, which we could not hold in October. Our regional relevance must come back, you know. We must offer to our neighbors, you know, whosoever it is, and in India included, you know, that we are open for business, we are open for peace and harmony. That has to be our new narrative, you know. And with Afghanistan, peace is particularly, and a harmonious relationship is particularly important.
Not only for China, not only for Russia, not only for the Middle Eastern country, these countries, the belly of Russia, these Central Asian states, Pakistan, even Iran.
So I was just about to add that the harmonious relationship with Afghanistan is what will let you realize your vision of reaching the Central Asia.
Peace at the end of the day.
I totally
Banday
second. I totally second Waqar what is saying. It's very important. You cannot grow, the country cannot grow if we have these regional tensions around us. Investors are not going to come. Miftah Saab have said, taxes is only one issue. Pakistan have a very
One
open,
of many.
Pakistan has a very open
Sir, I'll just give you,
investment regime.
Banday Saab, I'll just give you the closing remark here because I was just told that we have to wrap up the show. That we do talk about the perfect incentives what a country can give, we are giving. Even
Yes.
we have crossed the limit. I think we are giving too much. Look at the ROR factor. Look at the kind of sovereign guarantees the government is giving. Look, we just want them to come. But at the same time, when you have to have a meeting with the IMF people, you meet them in Dubai. So, you know, this is something which bothers
You
me.
cannot have a cricket match over here.
This is something, you know, when you see that, you know, please come and invest in Pakistan. Is a great country. I was so happy to see Malam Jabba and that area, and that I was watching on television this international ski, tournament being held. That I was surprised to see that, and those people were shocked to see that what a beautiful country Pakistan is. I think we need to market ourselves, but at the same time, again, the punchline is about peace, law and order and security. So thank you very much. Banday Saab, was a pleasure. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.